So, um, so we're going to get started today talking about, let's go to the main PowerPoint here. Let me bring this up here. Got it. When we left off, we were looking at this definition by Clifford Geertz of religion, this kind of long thing, and we talked about it briefly. We're not going to spend a whole lot of time in it, but there were a couple of points that I wanted to make about it because it leads into our discussion. Up till now, we've been discussing what is religion, but the most probably, well, not, I won't say most, but an essential part of religion as it's lived is what we call faith. And that's the active part. That's the engagement of the individual soul in the truths. I mean, it's one thing, you can be a philosopher and say, I believe these are truths. True. You can be just any human being. You can say, I believe this is the truth. It's an intellectual belief. But what converts an intellectual belief into religious faith? And that's what we're going to have to deal with. And I can see that I need to adjust my screen here on the PowerPoint because it's drifting off to the, come on. I had all this nicely sized up before my computer rebooted on me. There we go. All right. So we really need to understand or grapple with this experience that we call faith, because that's where all the issues come up, right? Say, well, I can believe that that's intellectually true, but what's the difference between believing something is intellectually true or accurate or truthful and religion, where you live it, where it becomes a part of how you live? That's what we're dealing with today. And this particular definition helps us come to grip with some of these things. So we already talked about how religion is a system of symbols, and we talked about how religion creates these long-lasting moods and motivations in people, and it formulates these general conceptions of a general order of existence. So this is all the intellectualizing. This is the ideation of religion, right? We're just discussing what the ideas are, how we come to these ideas. We use symbols. We get these moods and motivations in response to the symbols, and we have this. Then it kind of forms into something a little bit more solid, a general order of existence, which we might call a truth or a fact or an actuality, something like that. And then we clothe these conceptions with an aura of factuality that the moods and motivations seem uniquely religious. So I want to talk about this clothing with factuality. We didn't talk about this, so I want to talk about this for a minute. This will lead us into the subject of faith. When we say factuality, we go from an idea to an authoritative statement of truth. This is a fact. This is real. You can say, it's possible that God exists, but once you get to the point where you say, no, God exists, that's a statement of fact. It's moved beyond belief. You're actually making a statement that this is an idea that you have, but that idea is fact. I mean, we get all ideas all the time that as we begin to, move forward with those ideas, we find out they need to be modified, or they're not exactly right, or they're partially right, or boy, they're taking us in the totally wrong direction, just in general thinking in life. So once we get these symbols that establish moods and motivations and this general order of existence, this idea, then it's clothed in an aura of factuality. This is saying this is real. This is actual fact. And that makes these moods and motivations that we've already generated seem not just realistic, but uniquely realistic. In other words, you say, this is reality. Now, it's a whole nother subject of who says that a fact is a fact. You know, we've got all this stuff going on in popular culture today, where we have alternative facts. And, you know, and you hear people talk about, say, well, you have your right to opinion. You know, you have your right to your own opinion about things, but you don't have your right to your own separate set of facts, right? So here's where we're taking ideas and moving into reality. And religion, what we call this aura of factuality, we call it authority. So religion, in order to move from philosophy or just thinking, this ideation, and to actually be able to live something, that requires an authorization. And so religion requires faith in authority. Anyway, and so here's what I'm trying to say, and I'm trying to illustrate this before I actually make the statement. So this is the danger. I've given this lecture so many times. I know what I want to try to say, and I start illustrating it before I've actually stated it. So let me just state it. In religion, the way that authority is expressed and manifested is that in religion, the prior acceptance of the authority is a crucial component to get this stuff working. Everybody has presentation of information or facts, but before you can actually get it working, you have to accept that it is real and not just an idea, that it has some reality behind it. That's authority. And so you have to actually have faith, which is what we often call this, before you really know the details, before you can find out if it works. In other words, you can't just start the engine up and drive down the street and find out, oh, it works. That's just normal human life. Religion is different. You have to believe that it's real first, and then you can turn the engine on and drive down the street. We'll dig into this a little bit more. Here's the religious perspective. Maybe I could say it this way. Maybe this will make more sense. The religious perspective, the faith perspective, because faith is the activation of ideas in religion. The religious perspective says, he who would know, or she who would know whatever it is we want to know, you must believe it first, in the sense that you trust that what it is real. Then you can discover it. In normal life, we find out that it's factual first, and then we put our trust or our confidence or our faith in it, right? In religion, faith comes before you know. In regular life, knowing comes, and then once you see the details, once you know, then you say, oh, I can believe that. You know, if I came up to you and said, hey, here's the basic principle of life that I understand it. Little green Martian men, and presumably some Martian women, came here to Earth, you know, millions of years ago, and they settled here on Earth. And we are descendants from those little green Martian men. But because our atmosphere and everything is different, our colors change, but we're descendants of those. Now, there are two ways to go at that. We could go at it scientifically and try and find evidence of the Martian men and track the development of how we developed from Martians into what we are today. And then we say, okay, now I believe it. Now, at first, you say, that's preposterous. That's insane, Jeff. You're nuts, right? But if we could then get some knowledge about it, dig up some factual information, do some experimentation, whatever we got to do is use the scientific method to work through this and say, well, here's my argument. Here are the facts. Here are the facts. And then you say, oh, well, now I see. Now I believe. Before I didn't believe it, but now that you've shown me all this information, now I believe. Religion doesn't work like that. Religion works as first you must trust that this is authoritative, that it is real, and then you get to know the details. The word believe in English that comes into our everyday usage is really when we say I believe something, it doesn't carry any authority with it. The only authority it has is that we have decided to believe it. But I mean, it doesn't carry its own authority. And the word believe that was used in, for instance, in the 15th and 16th century in England, where we got our language from, and was translated for Greek words in the New Testament and Greek words or Hebrew words in the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, which is the majority of what we've been exposed to from a whole religious perspective. We understand religion through that lens, through the Bible, really. The word that was the word pistis pistis, which is the word for, or pisteo, which means to believe in Greek, or anyway, I won't go into the Hebrew and all that kind of stuff, but it was translated with the word believe. And at that time, it meant believe that it wasn't just to believe it intellectually, it was to make a commitment to it. Unfortunately, now believe can just be something that you thought to be true, but it doesn't elicit any type of commitment. Trust, confidence, faith in this thing requires a commitment. Now believe has just come to mean to give mental assent. Like, I believe this is taking forever to get through this first principle, Jeff. And I can give you mental assent. That's what it is. But that's not what believe means in a religious context. Believe involves commitment. And we refer to that in general as what we call the act of believing and committing, we call faith. Faith in religion is a prior commitment to truth and authority. So this is a different perspective than the perspective that we are trained and use in everyday life. The religious perspective is different than all other forms of human perspectives on things. So let me just dig into this. Oops. Keep hitting the wrong button here. So what is the religious perspective? Let's talk first about what it isn't. Okay, because we're trying to understand the religious perspective, the religious way of knowing involves commitment and authority. But so we're talking about what is faith. So, but what is this religious perspective that we call faith? Let's talk about what it isn't, first of all. So these first three things here are this is just normal human knowledge or normal perspective that you can take on life. So the religious perspective is that you must believe in order to know. And that's a different perspective. It's a different way of seeing the world from these three perspectives or these three viewpoints. The first one is common sense. Common sense is basically the acceptance of what is and what seems to be. It's common sense that before I try to walk out the door to my house, that the door is open. Right? Before you try and walk through the door of a store, it's good common sense to check to make sure that the door will open for you, right? A few years ago, I took my phone into the Apple store to get something adjusted, fixed, or whatever, what the case was. But so I went to an Apple store, they got the Genius bar generally upstairs or another part. And the Genius is up there, fixed my phone in just a few minutes. And so I walked down the stairs. Now, these Apple stores, their walls are all glass facing outwards. So they just got huge windows, right? And the one downtown in Chicago is glass basically on three sides. It's just, but certainly the part that faces the sidewalk or the street is all just glass. And Apple resists the temptation to put a bunch of signs and advertisements in the windows. They want you to see what's inside. They want you to, look in, and that draws you in. Well, anyway, so I'm walking out of the Apple store. This all has to do with common sense. So I'm giving you an example of where I didn't use my common sense. Okay. And I walk down and I see where the door is. It's just ahead of me here. Okay. But it's about, 30 feet away. I got to walk a little bit to get there. And so, but I was really excited they fixed my phone. So, I was texting my wife as I was heading towards the door. I saw where it was, looked up, saw where it was. And it's all glass, but I could see where the door was, see where the two handles were, one for this door, one for that door. And I started texting. So, hey, I got it all fixed. I think I'm going to pick up lunch on the way home. What do you want to eat? I'm waiting for her to respond to me. And while I'm walking the door, I'm doing that. Now, it's not good common sense to walk while texting. That's not common sense. Common sense says, if you want to text, stop, pay attention to what you're doing, put your phone away, and then pay attention to where you're walking, right? Does that make sense to you? Okay. I wasn't using that. That's why, we don't use our common sense when we text while driving. And that's a hard thing, Common sense says don't do it. It's dangerous. It could, right? But time to time we do stupid things. And this was a stupid thing. I was too busy texting, but I thought I knew where the door was, but I wasn't using my common sense. And I didn't stop doing what I was doing and pay attention to what was in front of me. And and I just walked to the door. I looked up when I got there, what I thought was the door, and pushed on the glass, and walked right into the window right next to the door. Because I had misjudged where the handle was. The handle was over here, and I walked over here. So the point is, I didn't use my common sense. Common sense is a really good thing. It allows us to adjust to and master the world, right? But that's human. That's not religion. That's just good stuff, right? Scientific mode. Now, this is a different approach to things rather than just common sense. It's more than that. It involves a system of deliberate doubt and systematic inquiry. You say, I think this might be, but I'm not sure. So let me set up some sort of way to test this to find out if this is reliable, right? And so science is great. Love science, but that's not faith. It's a human way of knowing and an essential human way of knowing, but it has nothing to do with religion. Human reason, as a matter of fact, and science can't answer life's important questions. It can't answer. Science can't tell us. Science can tell us that we live in a created universe, but it can't tell us how it came to be. It can't tell us if there is a creator or if there isn't, because we can't see back that far with science. It's great, but it has limits, right? Science is great. We're using science right now. Look at all this technology that we're using right now. When I was your age, this didn't exist. Phones were attached to cords, which were attached to lines that ran through the walls, right? So, all right. So that's the scientific mode. Great stuff. Love it. Use it every day, but that's not religion. Then there's aesthetics, the way of just appreciating things for what they are, valuing the world on the basis of the subjective images it provides for us. You see a beautiful sunset, and you have an appreciation for that, or a beautiful person. That's a better one. You're more likely to see a beautiful person than you are to see a beautiful sunset. And you go, wow, oh, yes, whatever your response is. That's an aesthetic. That's aesthetics. That's valuing things based on the subjective images that it produces for us. All three of these things are great and required to live a full life, but that's not religion. That's not faith. Faith is something different. Faith is the religious perspective, which we call faith, is different. So let's talk about what it is. The religious mode of perception says that the perceived realities of life are not all there is. Common sense, it's beyond common sense. It's beyond scientific investigation. And it's beyond the value of aesthetics, beauty, and all these things. It's beyond that. That's all part of our experience. But the religious mode of perception is seeing. Perception means to see, to view, a viewpoint, that the perceived realities of life are not all that there is. It's not that they're wrong. It's just that there's more. We call that spirituality, right? I mean, a lot of people all the time say, well, I don't consider myself religious, but I do consider myself spiritual. That's religion. When you say I don't consider myself religious, you're saying those are the activities, those are the rituals and the belief systems, the dogmas, the teachings, all that kind of stuff. I'm not really interested in that. But I'm interested in something greater than that. If it's something that the human mind can form, develop, and utilize, that's all great, but I want more. There's something beyond all of the human perspectives that we normally have. There's a wider reality which is other than the everyday human experience. And so that religious perspective, which we call faith, the way that you get it to work is you must believe first. And then you come to know. We call that faith. We're going to spend more time on this. We're not done with it, but we're done with this part of it. So, in the first chapter of your book, there was brief mention a little bit about this. And one of the people that was mentioned was a German by the name of Rudolf Otto. I don't know if he's German or Austrian, but close enough. Rudolf Otto. And he wrote a book in German called Das Heilige, which means, this is one of the few things that I actually remember from my 3-week intensive theological German course that I had to take to get into the Ph.D. program, it means the holy. There's an experience that people have that gives them a different perspective on life that is different than other human experiences and the perspective that it gives them. It's a non-rational, because it's not using our mind necessarily. It's not based in our mind. It's just another way of knowing that is actually prior to the rational. Otto said, and by the way, he died in 1937. He said that the key to religion is not a system of symbols. He's not saying that religion isn't a system of symbols, but if you want to understand what's really going on, what's the key that will unlock your understanding of a religion, it's not the symbols. I mean, I spent a significant portion of the day participating in worship, because it was Rosh Hashanah, which is New Year's, which strange that the new year is the first day of the 7th month, but that's a whole other story. But how can the first day of the 7th month be the first day of the new year? That's, but anyway, but what is involved is gathering together with other people who are Jewish and reflecting on all the symbolism of our traditions that point us to God. And without getting in detail of it, but it's exhausting and exhaustive, you're just seeing all these symbols, but that we symbolize things in religion, but really the key to religion, what we call faith, is an experience of not going to synagogue, not participating in worship, but it is an experience of the holy, which is another way to say whatever you think of as God or the ultimate in the universe is what Otto is referring to as the holy, the most holy, the high, most holy, right? So he says that this is an experience. It's a way of experiencing reality. It's a holy mode for approach to understanding. And through this mode, this mode of understanding, this perspective, one can freely say God is real without any proof. The proof can come later, but first you have to believe. Then you will know. So the belief and the knowing faith has nothing to do with rational, logical, human thought. Now, it doesn't negate that, but faith it's a perspective of the world. People talk about having a 33,000 foot view of things. It's one thing if you're driving down the street here in DuPage County, right? It's something else if you're 33,000 feet. You have a perspective on what's going on in life around you, right? But if you're 33,000 feet, you see it from what we often call a God's eye view. It's a different perspective, right? And no matter how hard you try by driving around on the street or exploring your neighborhood, you'll never get a perspective that is higher than your human experience. But if you could somehow see things from above, you would understand more and you'd have much more knowledge. That's an example of what we hear. So what I'm talking about here. So the holy is a way of experiencing reality. It's a holy mode for an approach to understanding. According to Otto, religion starts with the experience of the holy. The power of this experience of the holy, then, is in the retelling or celebration. And that's where religious ritual comes in. That's where sharing your story comes in. That's where the celebration and the communication of this. But religion starts with a personal experience, some sort of experience that you have, which is other than the normal human experience. And the retelling and the celebration and the dramatization of these become the building blocks of the system of religion, and we symbolize what we experienced. The Apostle Paul in the New Testament talks about experience, which he's clearly indicating that he had, but he talks about it in third person. I know a man. Whether this man was in the flesh or out of the flesh, I don't know, but he was caught up into the third heaven and saw the throne of God. Now, that is not a normal human experience. And that, you read it, he's talking about an experience that he had, but he can't personalize it because it's not with his intellect. It was so different. He just says, I know someone this happened to, and now let me tell you the story. So he had an experience, and in Paul's case, it was an experience, the first experience that he had of this, of Jesus, was a vision. He had a vision where he heard a voice coming out of the heavens, coming out of the sky, and he saw a light, and he heard Jesus speaking to him. Now, that's an experience. And that's what he based his communication and his explanation of everything Christian, everything Jesus that Paul did. And Paul is the primary shaper of what we call today Christianity. It was an experience he had. And you run into this all the time. People have experiences and then they try to explain it. So, well, let me explain it like this. Well, just imagine what happens to you when you have a dream, right? Just think about that for a second. You have a dream and you experience something. Now, you know, why you're having this dream is maybe you had too much pepperoni on your pizza. I don't, there are all kinds of reasons. It could be something that's running through your subconscious. It could be the voice of God. Who knows? But typically, when we do remember our dreams, if we can recall them initially we don't think this is a dream. We're having an experience, but when we wake up, we realize that must have been a dream, because here I am in my bed, and I'm not having that experience anymore. But you try to describe it, and it doesn't really make sense when you try to describe it, even to yourself. Even you say, no, wait a minute, what happened here? It just doesn't make sense. But you feel it anyway, and you're affected by it. I've known a lot of times when I've woken up just scared out of my mind. And then I'm so happy that I'm awake to find out it was just a dream. But my heart is still racing. There are other times when when it's a wonderful experience, right? And so you feel the effects of it, and then all you can say, well, it was kind of like this, and I kind of like this, and that's how religion tries to describe it, but you have to have the experience first. All right, so that's what Otto is saying here. He's saying this in academic terms, but hopefully you get some of this. So one of the things that was unfortunate about his book Das Heilige is when it was translated from German into English, which was a good thing, the editors changed the name of the book. It should have just been titled The Holy. That would have been an accurate description of what the book was about. But they changed it to The Idea of the Holy in English. And the holy is not an idea. It's a reality. It's not an idea. And ideas are not reality. They're just ideas. Ideas are like maps to reality, but ideas are not the reality, and ideas are not religion. Now, religion has all kinds of great ideas. But knowing the ideas and having the ideas is not the same as actually experiencing it. So Otto says that religious experience is basically non-rational. It is not something that can be intellectualized. It is another way of knowing that is not rational. It's not perceptual. It's not logical. It's an experiential way of knowing, which is other than or different than every other human way of knowing. It's in a total different dimension. It is spiritual knowing. And it's prior to being able to rationalize it and talk about it. You have the experience first, then you try to rationalize it and talk about it and communicate it and share it. But it starts with the experience. All religion, whether you're talking about a religious movement or religious people who start a religious movement or people in the religious movement, all religion starts with experience, the experience of the founders and experience of the participants. For instance, you probably have already run into a lot of people in the world today who want to talk about their experience of God. They say, oh, yeah, you hear this particularly from evangelical Christianity. You hear a lot about this and say, where people say, well, it's not about beliefs. It's not about a system of doctrines. It's not about that. Let me just tell you about my experience with Jesus. And I would rather hear about that than I'd rather hear all this stuff, all this academic stuff anyway. All right. I would really just hear from someone, what did you experience? Tell me about your life. I'm interested in you, not in a bunch of intellectualism. I'm interested in what you're experiencing. So tell me your story. And that's what religions do everywhere in the world. Every religion is they communicate these experiences by telling stories. And sometimes you have to make up a story because you can't really totally explain or relate all the details or give the impression of what it was like. Sometimes you have to expand on the idea. Say, well, it's kind of like this. What I'm trying to do now, I'm trying to have you experience this perspective of that Otto is giving here. So it's all prior to the rational. But, you know, one of the things that I often say to people is being born in a Christian home doesn't make you a Christian. Being born in a Jewish home doesn't make you a Jew religiously. Being born in a Muslim home doesn't make you a Muslim, any more than being born in a bakery makes you a donut. That's just where you were born. But it's once you experience being a Jew, a Christian, a Muslim, a Buddhist, a Hindu, fill in the blank. That's religion. It's your own personal experience. So human experience is at the heart of religion. And according to Otto, it is the human experience is where everything begins. And that's where it's this experience that we're trying to communicate. And we want others to have the experience of whatever that is. I mean, you know, in the Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, Islam is knowing God, an intimate relationship with the creator of the universe. That's what it's all about. It's not about going to church or going to the mosque or going to the synagogue or anything like that. It's about an intimate relationship with God. Anybody can go to a church, mosque, synagogue. Anybody can study theology. Anybody can study and practice rituals. But if you don't experience the reality that's behind the ritual, that spiritual reality, it's empty. It's one of the reasons a lot of people, particularly in your age group, and I did the same thing when I was in your age group, look at what we've been presented with religion, which is usually a system, principles, ideas, ways of living, and all this kind of stuff, that it just seems really superficial. And so we say, well, you know, that just didn't work for me. I couldn't live it. So you walk away from it. And that's probably the nicest way to explain what happens. Usually, you know, basically we say, the heck with this. I reject it all. And sometimes that's what you have to do. You have to reject everything that you've been exposed to and seek a real experience for yourself. Anyway, so religion starts an experience, and it's a way of knowing that's other. I'm going to give you a couple of other illustrations about this, just so we can understand how this works. And this, what we're talking about here is what is involved in faith. Faith is a different way of knowing. So you'll hear people say all the time, well, faith is irrational. Yeah, it is. It's not rational at all. Faith isn't logical. No, it can be, but it isn't itself. It's a different way of knowing. You just know. You just believe. And then you can get the rationalization. Then you can begin to understand it. But first you have to believe. All right, so let me give you an illustration of this. And it's the second bullet point here. The illustration that you've probably been wondering, what is this about? The Arctic tern. A tern is a bird, species of bird. And there is a particular subspecies of terns that are known as Arctic terns. And why are they called Arctic terns? Well, because they spend their summers in the Arctic Circle. And by the way, that's getting warmer and warmer every year for them. So they can spend their summers in the Arctic Circle and now get a pretty good tan if they want. Okay, but anyway, but the Arctic tern's home is not the Arctic. That's not where they live. They live on islands, and each flock has a home island in the thousands of islands that are in the South Pacific, in the ocean. And this particular species of tern, which is called the Arctic tern, it takes a vacation, a trip once a year to the Arctic Circle, During the summer, you wouldn't want to fly there during the winter. You know, your wings are going to freeze up, right? It ain't going to work. Birds are cold-blooded, but not that cold. But frozen blood won't work for them. Anyway, so so they summer in the Arctic Circle. And in order to do that in the winter, or excuse me, it's winter in the South Pacific, but it's summer in the Arctic Circle. Now, winter in the South Pacific is still pretty warm, right? But anyway, this is what they do. But it flies 5,000 miles over the dark ocean, over the ocean in the dark, to the Arctic Circle. And then that's what it does basically in spring. And then it flies back. Then when it gets to the Arctic Circle, then the birds mate, lay eggs, the eggs hatch, little hatchlings gain their strength, learn to flap their wings, and when, that's already, when the season is over, then, and it's starting to get cold again, it's starting to freeze in the Arctic, the whole community now of the terns who, have made the trip there in the first place, take the newborn hatchlings, and they all fly as one big flock to their home island. No biggie. I mean, it's kind of pretty cool that they know how to get there, but that's just, we call that natural instinct, right? They have that ability to do it without a GPS, without a smartphone, but they have something built into their brains, their being, that allows them to find their way. So that's no big deal. But here's what's amazing. It's no surprise that the whole flock can find their way back to the island, because they've got all the adults who led them there in the first place, and they just lead the whole flock back, and they find their way back to where they came from. Okay, no big deal. But occasionally, as summer ends and it starts to get cold again, sometimes there's an early freeze. It just, winter seems to be coming earlier, and all they know is it's getting cold. That means it's time to leave. They're not knocking off days on the calendar and say, wait, we got 3 more weeks of summer. What's going on here? It's getting cold. It's time to go. But often, not all the eggs have hatched yet. But, that's just too bad. You snooze, you lose. And so the hatchlings and the adult community fly back to their island in the Pacific. And those other eggs are basically frozen in the snow and the ice. And they're just abandoned, because what else can you do? But then, because it was an early freeze, sometimes what happens is then there's a subsequent thaw, because it wasn't really winter yet. It was just a cold front that moved through, and it wasn't really the beginning of winter yet. So what happens is those frozen eggs begin to thaw, and guess what? Some of them hatch. And those hatchlings, now there are no adults around now, but the hatchlings, they break their way out. They build their strength, learn to flap their wings, and the surviving hatchlings who had been left behind now because they hadn't hatched yet, now flap their wings and they begin to fly, and they fly to that same island. Now that's pretty amazing, right? It's kind of hard to explain. How do they know the way to that island? How do they know what air currents to follow? How do they know what magnetic, elements of existence? How do they know how to follow the magnetism of the Earth, right? How do they know how to find that particular? I mean, in the Pacific, there are thousands of islands. And how do they know to go to the Pacific and not to go to the Caribbean? Right? How do they know that? They just know it is not the normal tern way of knowing things. It is not by experience. It's not by science. Nobody scratched a map in the snow or ice and said, okay, when, if you hatch, here's a note, when you get to this place, turn left and fly this way, Well, that's for, what is that? They fly by themselves, but they've never been there before. You can say, oh, well, they were conceived there. No, they were conceived in the Arctic. They weren't even a twinkle in their parents' eye before they got to the Arctic. Right? So how do they know that? Well, we call that animal instinct. Right? And Otto would say, and I say, I think most people who study this would say, that religion is similar to that. It's a different way of knowing. It's other. It's just different. I'll give you another example. Most of us can speak. I mean, I assume you can speak some sort of language, right? But you weren't born understanding and speaking language, right? What happens is that syntax and grammar that are used that we talk about when we talk about language, these are simply rational explanations of what is already there. Children don't have to be taught a language. They don't have to be taught to speak. They just somehow know. They pick that knowledge up. It's not in them, as far as we can tell, but they're just able to know it. Now, I've tried to learn languages well beyond childhood, and it's always a struggle because I'm trying to learn the alphabet, how to spell words, how to sound them out, and then I got to learn the grammar and syntax of how to put it together in a sentence. A child just hears words and hears sentences and learns how to speak them. Without any training, they just have the experience of it and they know it. It's a different way of knowing than the way I, as an adult, have to learn another language. It's other than rational. Religion is like that. It's an other way of knowing. One more illustration, and I'll let this go. What about having babies? Women have been having babies for as long as there have been women, which, as far as I know, is as long as there have been humans, right? Or there wouldn't be any of us, right? So we all, women are having babies, and yes, you can get all kinds of training. I mean, you can be, an OBGYN, and you can be a midwife. You can be, you can go to Lamaze classes. You can read up. You can know everything about having a baby. But when it comes down to it, women know what to do. And of course, everybody's shouting at them at the last minutes. But and the question, and often the thing that you see is people say, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. Fine. Yes, you do. Just breathe. Just breathe. Just breathe and push. Just breathe and push. You know how to do this. You can do this. I don't know how to do it. You can do it. And guess what? They can. Now, how do they know that if they haven't been trained? They haven't taken Lamaze classes. If they haven't, how do they know? It's another way of knowing. It is something that is different than rational, intellectualized ideation. So, religion is a mode of experiencing that is other than rational experience. Another way to say this is it's another dimension. I'm going to leave some of this here now because I think I beat this to death. But in religious life, you start with the experience of the holy, whatever that is, but eventually does get rationalized with limits, definition, and structure. And that's what we end up studying. We look at the limits, the rationalization, the limits, the definitions, and the structure of religion. That's all we can do because we can't go out and experience it. You can't go out and have a Hindu experience in this class. I mean, you could, or Jewish experience, or a Christian experience, or any one of the 4,000 religions that we can identify in the world. in a class like this, we can't do that. But that's what we end up looking at. But that's really, we're looking at the wrong thing. What we need to do is, what is the experience that the person inside, on the inside in their heart, not their physical heart, but at the very heart of their being, we often call the soul or the spirit. That's what we want to, that's the prize. That's what it's all about. And the only way to get that information is either to have that experience for yourself, or let someone else tell you about their experience. And that's why the last and most important assignment in this course is, you're going to go out and you're going to talk to somebody who comes from, who has religious experience that is different than what you've been exposed to in your family, your upbringing, and just, in general. So, I want you to, I want you to learn how to listen to somebody that you don't already have ideas about, because that's automatically a structure. What you want to do is hear what's going on in their heart. Mm-hmm. That's what you're going to be doing for the rest of your life as you interact with other people who have different experiences than you do of the spiritual. You can say, well, that's different, I won't have anything to do with them, and then you'll be all by yourself. Or you can say, that's different, tell me about it, because I want to know not what religion you are. I want to know about you. What is important to you? Where is your head? Where is your heart? How do you understand your perspective? How do you see yourself in the universe? And how do you relate to the universe as you experience it? All right. That's what we're seeking to understand in this course. All right. So one more slide here. We've been talking about what is religion, and we've talked a little bit about faith, and we just need to be sensitive to what this is. But to kind of summarize, this is my thinking on this. For me, religion is like a pizza. And the real question is, when you have a pizza, what is the experience that you like to have? So we all order pizzas according to our tastes and our desires, the experience we have when we eat it. So some people, like a lot of meats on their pizza. Some people just want veggies. Some people want fruit. Some people want, this and that spice or different things. Cheeses and sauces and all these kind of things. And that's always personal. But at the end of the day, it's still a pizza. All right. And the question is what do you like on your pizza? And if we were to order pizzas for this whole group here, we would have to order a bunch of different pieces, besides the fact that we're all in different places. But if we were all together consuming pizza in one room and having pizza delivered, we'd have to have pizzas for every person there. And that's what satisfies you. So you choose these things based on what works for you, what satisfies you, what fulfills you, what gives you the feeling that you're seeking, the sense, So anyway, that's just the way I like to think about it. What do you like on your pizza? But that's making me hungry, and I haven't had my dinner yet. So, so I'm going to move on to another subject.